Welcome to Germany's #1 cultural destination, the state of Saxony. I'm Wolfgang Gärtner, Head of International Marketing for Saxony Tourism. While Saxony is best known for its beautiful capital, Dresden, and its largest city, Leipzig, what I want to talk about today is Saxony's castles and palaces. There are literally hundreds of them, but I've picked only a dozen, including the most splendid ones and some which have a very special story to tell. As you will see, they also stand for different themes, which add up to make Saxony such an interesting destination. But let us begin with a look at the Germany map, in case you're not yet familiar with Saxony. It is one of the 16 states of Germany and has a German history of 1100 years. Saxony borders the Czech Republic and Poland, as well as 4 German states, including Bavaria. Dresden is 2 hours south of Berlin and just 1.5 hours north of Prague. There are international airports in Dresden and Leipzig, and the ones in Berlin and Prague are also very close. Saxony is well connected to the Autobahn network of motorways. Dresden can be reached from Frankfurt and Munich in about 4.5 hours. Leipzig and Dresden are also part of the ICE high-speed train system. This is an important question, since we take castles and palaces for granted. As you can see, there are various factors which came together. Maybe the last one is also the most important, since it's led to stability and wealth. The House of Wettin ruled Saxony for 829 years, until it became a republic in 1918. A great monument to the endurance of the House of Wettin is the so-called Procession of Princes in Dresden, which shows these Saxon rulers on 24,000 Meissen porcelain tiles. Another beautiful illustration of the Saxon history can be found in the first of the castles and palaces that I would like to introduce to you. It is not just some palace, but the oldest of Germany.
Brothers Ernest and Albert, who ruled Saxony together, commissioned architect Arnold of Westphalia in 1471 to build a palace in their capital, Meissen, the first such construction in Germany. Unlike traditional castles, it had no defense function and was solely constructed for representative purposes. Influenced by French architecture, Arnold of Westphalia developed a new architectural style, characterized by net walls, curtained windows, and spiral staircases. While the decorations were clearly late Gothic, the structure already pointed towards the Renaissance. After serving as Europe's first porcelain manufactory, the now called Albrechtsburg Meissen was restored in the 19th century and beautifully redecorated with scenes from Saxon history.
The European hard porcelain was invented in 1708 in Dresden. In 1710, production was moved to Meissen. Since the 19th century, it has been produced in a custom-built manufactory. The conditions in Albrechtsburg Palace had always been less than ideal. The Meissen State Porcelain Manufactory offers a wealth of experiences, like visits to the demonstration workshops and the museum, behind-the-scenes tours, culinary experiences, shopping, and concerts on the world's only organ with porcelain pipes. Meissen, Saxony's oldest town, is just 30 kilometers or 20 miles away from Dresden. It is also the center of the Saxon wine region, and it can be reached by commuter train in 45 minutes. The porcelain manufactory has its own stop called Meissen-Triebestal, and the nearest stop for Albrechtsburg Palace is called Meissen-Altstadt, meaning Old Town. And old it is indeed. The claim that Albrechtsburg Palace is the oldest palace of Germany is based on the clear distinction in Germany between a Burg, which denotes a fortified castle, and a Schloss, which refers to a building of the nobility without a defense purpose. It can be translated with castle and palace, but in the English language, the difference is not so clear. Many a burg was later rebuilt into a Schloss. In the next case, it is even impossible to put a term on it, since it's actually two in one, in a rather twisted way.
The world is indeed topsy-turvy when it comes to Wesenstein Castle. Originally located on top of a rock, it grew in both directions. So, the stable's on the 5th floor, above the living quarters, while the banquet hall is in the attic. Wesenstein Castle came into the possession of Saxony's royal family in the 19th century and survived hard times unaffected. In the medieval parts, visitors can learn about the noble family which owned Wesenstein Castle for 350 years. The Baroque and neoclassical living quarters provide a good insight into how the royals lived. The reception area was designed by Gottfried Semper, architect of the famous Dresden Opera House. The Protestant chapel is the work of Johann George Schmidt, who completed the Church of Our Lady of Frauenkirche in Dresden. And the Baroque garden is simply a joy.
Wesenstein is just 24 kilometers or 15 miles away from Dresden. It can also be reached by train, first going from Dresden to Heidenau and then from Heidenau to Wesenstein. The second ride is considered to be most scenic, leading through the romantic Müglitz Valley with many tunnels and bridges to cross. A later stop on the line is Glashütte, where some of the finest watches in the world have been made since the 19th century. A visit to the German watch museum Glashütte is highly recommended. Not far from Wesenstein Castle, one of Germany's most dramatic landscapes can be found. Originally formed at the bottom of an ocean, the Elbe Sandstone Mountains consist of bizarre rock formations and distinctive table mountains covered with lush forest. Their most beautiful parts now form the Saxon Switzerland National Park. The name Saxon Switzerland was coined in the 19th century by two Swiss painters who were teachers at the Dresden Art Academy. The most popular attraction is the Bastei, meaning bastion, a rock formation which features a stone bridge from the 19th century, a panorama restaurant, and even a hotel. It is just 42 kilometers or 24 miles away from Dresden. In the valley of the Elbe River below, commuter trains and the ships of the world's oldest and largest steamboat fleet offer alternative transport from and to Dresden. The runner-up to the Bastei is another attraction, which is neither a castle or a palace, but a fortress.
Königstein Fortress is one of the largest fortresses in Europe, sitting on a mountaintop. It served not only as a military base, but also as a safe haven for the royal family and its treasures, as a political prison, and as a prisoner of war camp in both world wars. Today, it is a museum, and it prides itself with the fact that it was never conquered. However, this is not entirely true. In 1848, after a bet made in a drunken state, the chimney sweep Sebastian Bratzky climbed up the vertical sandstone rock and over the fortress walls just to be arrested upon arrival. It was a milestone in rock climbing, for which the whole Saxon Switzerland region is famous for. In 1955, it became legal to climb up the rock in the same way that Bratzky did, and the passage is now even named after him.
From the town of Königstein, where the commuter trains and the steamboats make a halt, the fortress can be reached by shuttle bus. At the bottom of the rock, another shuttle, which looks like a train, can be used if walking up is not an option. Nothing can compete with the beauty of nature, right? Some people beg to differ. In recent years, this bridge, the Rakots Bridge, better known as Devil's Bridge, has created a storm in the social media. It is located in the Kromlau Park. Like other landscape parks, it was created to look perfectly natural, while indeed it is completely artificial. It was modeled after a much more famous landscape park, which is just a few minutes away and has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 2004.
Hermann Ludwig Heinrich Prinz von Pückler-Muskau was a man of many talents. He served in various armies, was military governor of Bruges, a real dandy, an avid traveler, a prominent writer, and a ladies' man. But he was also a self-taught genius of landscape architecture whose influence went as far as America. Starting in 1815, he created a huge landscape park around his castle and town. No effort was spared. He resettled the whole village, brought in large amounts of topsoil from elsewhere, and was the first to relocate large trees for his vistas, creating an artificial landscape that looks perfectly natural. After German reunification, the Muskau Park became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, having been revitalized by Saxony and its neighbor Poland, sharing the park grounds since 1945.
But Muskau is located in the northeasternmost corner of Saxony, close to the town of Weißwasser, about 120 kilometers or 75 miles from Dresden. By the way, Bad does not mean bad. It is the official designation for a spa town. A visit to the Muskau Park can be easily combined with a trip to Görlitz, a little further south, which is considered to be the most beautiful town of Germany. In Saxony, important history has been written. One of the outstanding events was the Reformation, which goes back to the ideas of the former monk Martin Luther. But it would not have been possible without the protection and the active participation of the electors of Saxony, who, at that time, had their residence in the town of Torgau. Located on the Elbe River, it still looks like in the 16th century, making a journey back in time very easy. The focal point is Hartenfels Castle, from where the Saxon rulers orchestrated the developments which led to the formation of the Lutheran denomination and subsequent other Protestant churches.
The town of Torgau, near Leipzig, still looks like it did in the 16th century, much to the delight of its visitors. Hartenfels Castle is the largest fully preserved castle in Germany from the early Renaissance period. It was completely rebuilt in the early 1600s as the residence of the rulers of Saxony. Its most outstanding architectural feature is the spiral staircase, which still puzzles architects today, since it was constructed without any central support for the stairs. But equally important is the chapel, the oldest Protestant church in the world. It was built to the ideals of the great reformer Martin Luther, with the Word, symbolized by the pulpit, taking center stage. Luther himself dedicated the church in 1544 on one of his more than 60 visits to the town. It became the blueprint for all new Protestant churches that followed.
It's just 110 kilometers or 68 miles away from Dresden, but much closer to Leipzig, which is just 55 kilometers or 35 miles away. By commuter train, the journey from Leipzig to Torgau takes only 45 minutes. After the Reformation and the resulting war between the Catholics and the Protestants, Torgau was no longer in the spotlight. But on April 25th, 1945, the American and Soviet troops met for the first time on the bridge across the Elbe River, which was the beginning of the end of World War II in Europe. Speaking of which, during the war, Colditz Castle served as a prisoner of war camp. A special one, that is. What was reserved for high-ranking Allied officers, including the nephew of Winston Churchill. What they all had in common was their desire to leave this place as fast as possible.
Colditz Castle has a checkered history, but it is best known today as a prisoner of war camp for Allied officers between 1939 and 1945. The prisoners made more than 300 attempts to escape. Some of these were strokes of genius, but most of those who escaped were caught eventually. The Escape Museum tells some of their captivating stories. Nothing fascinates more than the story behind the Colditz glider. Behind a false wall in the attic, two pilots assembled a two-seater, using stolen pieces of wood, floorboards, bed springs, electric wires, and, for the skin, sleeping bags starched with cooked millet. But the plane never took off, since the camp was freed by the Americans. In the year 2000, a replica successfully made a flight, proving that the daring plan would have worked.
Since April 2024, Colditz Castle can be explored in a different way with the so-called Histopad, a tablet guide. There are 8 immersive rooms to be explored and 10 escape stories to be brought to life. 6 languages are available, including German, English, French, Czech, Polish, and Dutch. Histopads are also available in Albrechtsburg Palace and Moritzburg Castle. Along the 2 Mulde rivers and the Zschopau, a large number of castles can be found, originally built to protect travelers on the waterways. Colditz is about 50 kilometers or 30 miles away from Leipzig and about 80 kilometers or 50 miles from Dresden. Very close to Colditz is the town of Rochlitz. Rochlitz Castle could be easily mistaken for a cathedral due to its church-like towers. Like many other castles, it was rebuilt into a palace, even though it still looks well fortified. But there's one castle nearby which has retained most of its medieval character.
Kriebstein Castle is one of the best preserved ones from the Middle Ages. It was erected in the late 14th century to ensure safe passage on the Mulde River. Its story could have ended quickly though. Having been conquered by a rival knight, it came under the siege of the Saxon ruler, not named Frederick the Belligerent for nothing. When the situation became desperate, the knight's wife begged for mercy, and her wish was granted that the women should be allowed to leave, carrying only what was dear to them. To Frederick's surprise, they left Kriebstein Castle carrying their husbands. Even though this tale is also attributed to other castles, there's one thing that is unique to Kriebstein Castle. The Kriebstein Room is the only preserved planked room with colorful depictions from the early 15th century.
Kriebstein Castle is 70 kilometers or 43 miles away from Dresden and 75 kilometers or 46 miles from Leipzig. Like the other castles on the Mulde rivers, it is a perfect starting point for a hike. Along the river, there's also cycling paths, and activities on the water are also an option. A perfect example on how culture can be combined with nature in Saxony. Kriebstein Castle cannot be reached by train, but luckily, Saxony has a long tradition of making cars, going back to the year 1900. Today, there are 4 car factories in Saxony, which can all be visited. The most unusual is the transparent manufactory of Volkswagen in Dresden, where everybody can just walk in and have a look around. The Leipzig factory is Porsche's largest, and it features a racetrack and a mud track. Audi was founded in Zwickau in 1909, and the original Audi factory has been turned into the award-winning August Horch Museum. And for a similar reason, there's a magnificent motorcycle museum in nearby Augustusburg Castle, the so-called Crown of the Ore Mountains.
Augustusburg Castle is not called the Crown of the Ore Mountains for nothing. Sitting on top of the Schellenberg mountain, it dominates the surrounding area. A lot of the original Renaissance appearance has been preserved. However, the best-known attraction of the castle is the Motorcycle Museum, considered to be the best in Europe. Why here? In nearby Zschopau, there used to be the largest motorcycle factory in the world, making DKW and later MZ branded two-stroke two-wheelers. Naturally, they are featured heavily in the collection, but there are many other products, including rarities like the first mass-produced motorcycle or the longest one ever made. Visitors can also delve into racing history, which keeps being written on the nearby Sachsenring Grand Prix racing track.
Augustusburg is very close to Saxony's third largest city, Chemnitz, which was the cradle of German engineering and the city with the highest industrial output in Germany until World War II. From Dresden to Augustusburg, the distance is 75 kilometers or 46 miles. By train, the journey takes 17 minutes. Time to introduce the Schlösserlandkarte, meaning Castle Land card. It is issued by the Saxon State Castle Association. For 10 days, it costs just 30 euros and it provides free entrance to many of the places mentioned here. It can be purchased online or at the cashier's desk of the participating castles and palaces. While the sound of motorcycles is music to the ears of some people, it is probably noise to others who prefer a more traditional sound. When it comes to classical music, no other region in Germany can compete with Saxony. For example, Wagner and Schumann were born in Saxony, Bach is buried in Leipzig, and other composers like Mendelssohn, Weber, and Schütz spent the decisive periods of their lives in the region. Leipzig is the only rival to Vienna when it comes to music history. In fact, Saxony has everything, from the music instrument making to the performance by famous orchestras and choirs in famous venues. And there are also highly respected festivals. One of them is the Moritzburg Festival, and it could hardly take place in a more beautiful location, created by another Saxon ruler named Augustus. This time, Augustus the Strong.
Moritzburg Castle looks like it has just been built for Instagram pictures. The picturesque hunting and pleasure castle of the Saxon rulers sits on an artificial island in an artificial lake, surrounded by woodlands. The interior is famous for its leather wall coverings from the Baroque times. They have been preserved in 11 rooms, making this the biggest collection of its kind. One room, however, sports a very different style. It is decorated with millions of colorful bird feathers. At first sight, the decorations look like textiles and paintings. The last restoration of this unique treasure took 19 years and rightfully won a prize. This is one of only 2 feather rooms in the world, the other one being in the little Pheasant Castle, also located in Moritzburg.
Moritzburg is just a few kilometers or miles away from Dresden. In the old days, it could be easily reached by horse in one day. Horses still play a major role in Moritzburg since they have been bred in this location for 300 years. Every year in September, the horse parades attract a large number of visitors. With its lakes and forest, Moritzburg is perfect for horse carriage rides, which are on offer in front of Moritzburg Castle. The Iron Horse also plays a role, since Moritzburg can be reached from Radebeul, a suburb of Dresden, by narrow-gauge train, one of 5 lines in Saxony, still powered by steam every day. And Radebeul is also the home of the next castle, which is more like a mansion, connected to a tradition which has shaped the Saxon landscape for more than 850 years.
Count August Christoph von Wackerbart, one of the most important members of the Saxon government under Augustus the Strong, really wanted to retire in style. He had already built the palace and gardens of Großsedlitz for this purpose, but was forced to sell his property to his ruler, who had taken a liking to it. Then he hedged his bets by building the Kurländer Palace in Dresden, the new palace in Zabeltitz, and a mansion on the hills of what is now the town of Radebeul. To press his claim, he called the latter one Wackerbart's Rest. Wackerbarth had little time to enjoy his retirement home and its beautiful terraced gardens and vineyards, but his former property is now the Wackerbarth Castle Saxon State Winery, Europe's first event winery.
Getting to the Wackerbarth Castle Saxon State Winery is very easy. It can be reached by tram number 4 from Dresden Theatre Square. Since visits to Wackerbarth Castle invariably include wine or sparkling wine tastings, this approach makes most sense. In Dresden itself, there are 3 must-dos: a guided tour of the historic city center, a visit to one of the museums of the Dresden State Art Collections, and a ride on one of the historic steamboats, preferably to Pillnitz, where Saxony's most exotic palace awaits its visitors.
The chinoiserie, the Asian fashion, had a large impact on Saxony and is manifested in many buildings and pieces of art. The most impressive palace ever erected in this style can be found in Pillnitz, on the outskirts of Dresden. It was originally built as a Chateau de Plaisance and was later expanded into the summer residence of the Saxon kings, gaining formal gardens and an English landscape park in the process. The lavish and exotic decorations were both inspired by the Baroque style and by scenes on porcelain imported from Asia, which suggested a carefree lifestyle in the Far East, sharply in contrast to the strict protocol at the Saxon court.
By now, you have encountered wonderful architecture and you have faced the music. But Saxony also shines in art, particularly through the Dresden State Art Collections. Started in 1560 by Elector Augustus of Augustusburg Castle fame, it grew over the centuries, since every ruler from the House of Wettin added something. This way, one of the best art collections in the world came into existence. And while it is spread out over many museum buildings, the Royal Palace in Dresden city center should be the first port of call. It is both a palace and an art museum, a winning combination.
Dresden's Royal Palace is like a world of its own. Expanded to present size in the middle of the 16th century, it offers beautiful architecture and exquisite art. Destroyed in World War II, it was rebuilt as a museum for the Dresden State Art Collections. Thus, it combines splendid historic rooms, reconstructed to the last detail, with modern museum rooms, where the focus is on the exhibits. Visitors are able to take a journey through the Renaissance and the Baroque ages. There are many unique pieces of art to be found along the way, since the collection is considered to be one of the best in the world. Knights tournaments, often seen as a thing from the Middle Ages, were held in the beautiful stable yard until the 18th century, as illustrated in the Hall of Giants.
Last but not least, a building should be mentioned that is often called a palace, but has never been one. The Dresden Zwinger was built around an open-air festival space, and it derives its name from a military term, since it sits on a former bastion of Dresden's fortifications. Technically, it is just a row of pavilions. However, Augustus the Strong, Saxony's most splendid ruler, wanted to build a new palace, which would have been bigger than Versailles. The Zwinger would have been incorporated into it as one of many yards, with the Crown Gate as the main entrance to the new complex. It was not supposed to be, and yet the Zwinger is one of Dresden's biggest attractions, since it combines splendid architecture with masterful sculpting. Since 1728, it has been the home of some of the museums of the Dresden State Art Collections. Palace or not, royal it is indeed. I hope you have gathered some interesting information on the castles and palaces of Saxony, developed a feeling for what Saxony stands for, and understood why it is Germany's #1 cultural destination. A great source for further information is our B2B website. You can also subscribe to our newsletter by replacing /B2B with /newsletter. And do not hesitate to contact us with any questions.